Hi, I'm Benjamin Studebaker.
This is David McCarricker. You're listening to Why Left?
So today on Why Left, we're going to talk about the big news about the war plans group chat.
Group
Convention
group
where
chat with
they're
the boys.
dressing
Hold
up
on,
in
what?
full cosplay.
I don't know what that was, but some video was playing in the background. You could hear it?
I couldn't hear it.
You couldn't hear it? Oh, okay.
No.
Well, I think the audience might have been able to, but it was just a video that started playing. It was like Anne's voice, it sounded like. But anyway, yeah, the group chat with the boys over Signal. Benjamin sent me this message. Have you seen this? And I'd only seen something Ken Klippenstein had shared about. They should release the full conversation. If these people were real journalists, they would have done that. And I didn't really know what the context was, and I didn't bother looking into it too much. The article you sent me, though, was the Atlantic article. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about that before we kind of get into some of our thoughts on it.
Yeah, and they eventually did release the full set of screens after Hegseth lied about it, and it became necessary to show that Hegseth was lying. They then released all of it. But yes, initially what you have is a group chat starts on Signal. It's started by Mike Waltz, who's one of the national security advisors. Mike Waltz starts this group chat, and he accidentally invites the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic to the group chat. The group chat involves a bunch of discussion of this military operation in Yemen. The purpose of the operation is to try to weaken the capacity of the Houthi rebels in Yemen to disrupt shipping in the Red Sea. That shipping goes through the Suez Canal. You might remember there was something called the Suez Crisis back in the 50s. This canal has been incredibly economically important to Europe. Something like 40% of European trade goes through the Suez Canal. It's much less important to the United States. And J.D. Vance raises this in the discussion, because only about 3% of U.S. trade goes through the Suez. So J.D. Vance goes, I don't like helping these Europeans. I don't want to help them. Why are we always having to help the Europeans? And Hegseth, the defense secretary, responds with, I hear your concerns, J.D., but we're the only ones who can do this. The Europeans don't have the capability to do this for themselves. And so after this back and forth, J.D. goes, well, I have my reservations, but I'm a member of the team, so I will support the collective decision, even though I have my reservations about it. And then they get into a bit where they actually do put out what appear to be war plans, what the actual operation will be, operational details. And then the operation is carried out, and then they celebrate the success of the operation, and that the operation killed, in particular, one person that they were very keen to kill. It killed, I think, something like 50 people, some of whom, of course, were not targeted, but just happened to be in the vicinity. That typically happens with these kinds of strikes. And then afterwards, there was an exchange of emojis celebrating the strike and its success from the various players. And it was only after the strike had occurred that the Atlantic editor-in-chief knew that he was not in a fake chat, because they said the attack would occur at a particular time, and then news of the attack happened at that time.
Gosh.
So it's definitely real. It has to have been real for all of that to be the case. Now, the fact that this group chat started and nobody complains about the fact that they're doing this on Signal indicates that this happens with some frequency, that people in the government use Signal for stuff that maybe they shouldn't be using it for. The mistake is to invite the Atlantic journalist, who will, of course, do the outsider, oh my God, you're breaking the rules thing with it. You're muted right now, Dave.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm just saying, right. That is ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah. So for him, it's incredible that he's been invited to this, and it's incredible that any of this is being conducted over Signal. I think that the thing that really sticks out to me that I think is valuable about this as an experience is to just see how it actually is that these sorts of decisions are taken. People have very human conversations about this stuff. They have a very open conversation about, should we bomb these people and why? And People raise their potential objections or reservations about it, but they talk it out, come to a collective decision, and then act. It's a very clear instance of political communication. And a lot of the people who are mad about it have to be mad about it because it's a security leak, because they support helping the Europeans. Substantively, many of the people who are now framing themselves as critical of all of this want the United States to help the Europeans, have been upset that the United States has been talking about maybe not helping the Europeans so much. So this strike is an instance of precisely what a lot of Democrats want, which is the United States backing its allies in the region, helping the allies do things that they want to do, but don't have the capacity to do, stepping up and filling that void for the allies. And it's Hegseth who is raising these, what we would think of as conventionally Democratic Party arguments for helping the Europeans. So despite this appearance of a total lack of commitment to Europe and to the allies, what you actually see in the exchange is that the administration remains, despite certain reservations from J.D. Vance, committed to European security and to the maintenance of European trade. Now, the thing that is going to really cause trouble for them is that they invited this Atlantic journalist, which they should never have done. It was Mike Waltz who did it, and Mike Waltz's mistake. Will Mike Waltz get fired for this? We'll see. The next thing is that, of course, there was an opportunity to ambush these guys who were in the group chat before they found out about the news story and to ask them about it before they knew that it was a story. There was a window of time in which these journalists knew about this because the Atlantic guy talked to them, and they ambushed various people and asked them about it to see if they would own up to it having existed and their having been in it. And Hegseth, the defense secretary, really screwed up because he blatantly lied about this group chat in a really obvious way. There's no plausible deniability. He just lied about it. A lot of other people said, I don't remember.
Right.
Especially this idea that war plans were shared. I don't remember war plans. I'm not sure about that. This is what you do. You're telling me for the first time, Trump said when he got the question. There are ways that you can, if you don't know what something is and you don't want to say something that will cause damage, you can walk around it. Hegseth is too stupid to do that.
Oh my God.
He steps right in it. And I thought during the confirmation hearings that Hegseth was the person least likely to be a competent member of this administration. It struck me that he was probably the worst pick of the whole bunch. And I was the most surprised of all of the people who got in. He's the one who surprised me the most.
I was just listening to a New Yorker article about the secret history of Pete Hegseth, and I'll want to say some more about that later. For now, I'll just say, yeah, why this guy? Like, what is this? What did Trump supposedly think Hegseth could do for him?
The issue is that Trump doesn't trust a lot of the people that you would typically pick to be Secretary of Defense. Lately, in recent years, it's become increasingly common for retired generals, retired officers to be picked for Secretary of Defense. This wasn't always the case. It used to be the case that there was more civilian leadership in defense. But more recently, the emphasis has been on picking retired generals. The retired generals are perhaps the most unfriendly pool of people to Trump you can imagine. Demographically, this is not the set of people that he wants leading a department that is associated very much with the military and therefore oversees many of the parts of the state he is most concerned about and has the least ability to easily rearrange. It's one thing to fire some bureaucrats in the Department of Education. It's another thing to try to do military purges. That's quite hard to do. Quite hard. So he wanted someone he could trust to lead defense. And he goes and gets this TV guy who really has no basis for doing this kind of job. And the senators allow this in the tightest vote of all the votes. It was a 50-50 with J.D. Vance having to break the tie.
And
they let him have his guy.
David Gonzalez has just said in the chat a minute ago that the only person who comes out looking remotely good from this is JD Vance. I don't know. What do you think? You think that's true?
Well, some people are going to like it because they're going to like that JD Vance raised concerns about it. Those concerns are not necessarily anti-war concerns. It's not that JD Vance doesn't think the bombing should happen. He just thinks the Europeans should pay more for defense and then carry out the bombing themselves.
Right. Right. And that was the point you brought up last time, I think, which is that seems to be what most of these arguments are about. It's like, how much should Europe be paying for this stuff? And that was
how much of the bombing should the Europeans be doing as opposed to us?
Right.
Right.
So I wasn't actually able to read the chat itself, but I had a lot of fun thinking about these guys exchanging emojis. And now it's dark fun. You know, it's not like light fun. It's not like this is I'm celebrating over here. I think some people are like, ha ha ha, look how stupid they are. And other people are like, oh, look at how relatable they are. But to me, it kind of feels like that movie that came out about the last days of Stalin, or like right after Stalin died, and everybody kind of the meltdown around him, right? It's that kind of like goofy, like incompetence. And I wonder if that could be the point. There's this little conspiracy theorist in me always, and I have to feed him a little bit from time to time so he doesn't, try to burst out too much. And it's just like, but what if they just put the Atlantic guy in there on purpose? And the whole point is just to kind of like get everyone talking, and to make everyone go, look, they're relatable. Or on the other side, what would be the opposite of they're relatable? Oh, that's insane. It's not relatable. I would never do that. When of course most people are like, well, actually, we do everything like this now. It's true.
Yeah. So my case against the conspiracy theory would be, first, that when they asked Hegseth about it, it seemed very obvious that Hegseth had no idea that that guy was in that room. He thought he could get away with denying that it took place. So if it was some kind of plot, that plot would have to have been against the Secretary of Defense on some level.
Okay.
Which,
yeah.
Why would they do that? Why would they create an internal division of that kind? Doesn't seem to advantage them in any way. Secondly, if you look at how this story is going down, even conservative media, even Fox, are critical of this. This is something that the right-wing media also doesn't like, and it doesn't like it because the right-wing media cares about national security, a lot of it, and thinks it's a bad look to be sloppy with this stuff. And this is the sense in which the Atlantic journalists and the right-wing media are in lockstep. These guys all are concerned about national security, and it bothers them that these guys play these kinds of games.
Right.
And some of it also is that the journalists are both inside and not. If someone like the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic, we would think of him as a consummate establishment figure. But in his mind, he's a journalist who's outside the club. And they let him in the club. And then they're behaving in the club in this way that he thinks is obscene. If he were in the club, he would never behave like this. He would follow all the rules. He would be a good boy. But inside the club, they're doing wild stuff.
Yeah.
So he wants to run and tell everybody, oh my God, do you see what they're doing in the club?
Yeah. I was thinking I hadn't really thought of the second angle there. The first one did, I was like, I don't know that it could really look good for Pete. But the reason, yeah, because I have arguments with my little conspiracy theorist self, and my argument was, yeah, except that the whole lock her up thing was about Hillary using private servers. That's what that was about. This is that. I think this is Signal using encrypted stuff. This is all private. This is not, they're not communicating through like a government phone that has government channels where you couldn't allow.
And we should emphasize this. There is a government system that they're supposed to use.
Yeah.
It's not like there isn't one. There is one that they're supposed to use. There is an obvious procedure for how to have this kind of conversation. It's just that it's very inconvenient to use it. because you have to be in a secure environment. And I've known enough about, people who deal with this stuff to know something about what is involved in the secure environment. It is a pain in the ass, and it's very difficult to use if you're on the move or on the go. So if you're traveling around, if you have events all over the place and you have a very busy schedule, communicating on the official government channel will sometimes be impractical. So I can understand why they would want to occasionally divert from using it. At the same time, they don't want to draw any attention to the fact that they sometimes divert from using it because this increases the incentive for other actors to try to get this information. So to leak it to the press that they sometimes do this stuff on Signal makes it harder for them to communicate through these kinds of channels in the future. And it means that more of the time now, they're going to have to do the whole song and dance of using the secure system, which will be inconvenient and annoying for them on a personal level. This is going to make the actual lives of these people worse in a significant way.
Yeah, it seems like seems kind of like a nice little follow up to our episode on they have a problem with passing on the torch. It's a problem with the olds. These media issues, private servers, using Signal, it being so cumbersome to use the infrastructure that's currently in place. All of this speaks to the fact that there's a fundamental breakdown in communication between generations and between people in power and the people in the tech elite. Really,
yeah. And if you notice that chat is mainly middle-aged people. It's not Trump and it's not the older people. The older people think it's no big deal to use the existing system. For them, the existing system is in many ways much quicker than whatever they would have been able to do in the 70s or 80s. So for them, the formal system is perfectly fine. It's the younger generations that are accustomed to our kind of communication in their personal lives. When they come to DC and they get into this circle, to them, it's a huge, huge pain in the ass. And they understand in principle why everything needs to be secure, but it's annoying because it inhibits the speed. And there are going to be cases where you'd rather have speed of communication than the top level security. There are. But even in those situations, you certainly don't want to accidentally invite a journalist into the room because he's then going to leak the fact that you communicate this way. And then that creates an actual security liability, which means you'll never be able to communicate that way again.
Yeah. And in a sort of way, it actually brings up something interesting, I think, about the medium. But really quick, I have to run upstairs and grab a little thing that I forgot to have down here. It's my external drive that I actually need for something I'm going to do on this episode. So, folks, we're going to be right back. I'm just going to play this while I run up there, and then we'll be back to talk about form versus content and the porkyification of government.
Joy to the world. There we go. Yeah. You can support the free and public work at TU by becoming a patron over at Patreon. But if you would like to get involved and become a member at Theory Underground so that you can listen to special content that is not accessible to anyone else, or if you go up a subscriber level, actually join in the discussions, or at the top level, have us actually read your work, giving constructive feedback, and ultimately paving a way to potentially being a part of what we call the turn, then you'll want to become a subscriber. That's how you will access the ongoing courses and seminars. We've brought together Benjamin Studebaker's experience in political theory and science and philosophy with my critical social theory, phenomenology, existentialism, critique of political economy, critical media theory approach, combined with Michael Downes's.
All right, folks, we're back. Welcome back, Benjamin.
Great to be back.
Hey, chat, let us know if it paused for a long time and didn't play the PSA because we're a little confused about what happened there. But I think I have the solution all figured out. Anyway, so I said the porkyification of government. And I'll go ahead and say a quick little thing about that. I just saw the movie Porky's for the first time. Have you seen that one, Benjamin?
Porky's. I have not seen that one.
Really? Okay, so it's kind of like American Pie. It's kind of like American Pie, or just any of those sort of movies where it's got a bunch of guys between the ages of 18 and 20, and kind of the whole subtext, maybe even plot, maybe even character development, kind of revolves around someone getting laid or a group of people getting laid. It's a whole genre, but Porky's is a 1980s version. Maybe it's the first. Maybe it's the father of these kinds of movies. But basically, Porky's is a 1980s treatment of the 1950s, meaning they blow the 1950s party culture out of. They kind of like project their 1980s party culture into the 1950s. And I think that's part of the joke. For movies like American Pie, the joke is just like, hey, it's guys being guys, ha ha ha. But in Porky's, the joke is, imagine if our parents were like this, you know? And it's, but they never say that because they used to not signpost in movies, right? And so it's just a crazy movie. Well, I saw it at Mikey's place. It was like a movie night. Anne was definitely put off by how obscene and well, it's not the obscenity, it's the misogyny of it. It is actually a little off-putting watching it with a woman who you respect. It's like, oh, awkward. Well, anyway, Porky's is all that I could think of when reading this this piece about Hegseth. Hegseth is not just like a frat bro who never grew up, but then it looks like he just spent a lot of time being the sort of representative of vets while really just doing that for some astroturfed nonprofit. And that the whole time he was drunk. Like that's, I don't know, I don't trust random authors publishing at the New Yorker, so I can't tell you how reputable any of this is, but it was like story after story after story. And this is, hold on, let me pull it up. It's by Jane Mayer. Jane Mayer, December 1st, 2024, Pete Hegseth's Secret History. Not only does he have like, he like Trump, he paid someone who was accusing him of rape to kind of keep them silent and all of this, but also his time at it was Veterans for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America. They would like separate the party girls from the other girls, and then like ditch the other girls and take the party girls out, like in the workplace. Right, like this was Hegseth's thing, right? And he would get so drunk, he'd take them all to the strip club, and then he'd get so drunk he'd try to get up there and dance on the stage, right? So this was a guy who was repeatedly for years in his, older than us, being escorted out of meetings where he was supposed to be not just the representative for veterans in the United States, but also he was supposed to be the the leader in those spaces. And so just hearing about that, not only is this guy, actively lying to the press and currently in a position of extreme power, but also that he's like this. Right? That he's not just incompetent, he's not just stupid, he's also just like a party boy is kind of what I was thinking about. It's like the whole them sitting there and doing a group chat for their war planning and then sending emojis with American flags and little flames and like, I don't know, explosions or whatever. They're like, yeah, that to me is, I don't know. It's nice. It's kind of nice actually, because some people try to take everything very seriously. Like these leaders, they try to take them seriously. And I feel like when they do this kind of thing, it helps everyone see them a little more realistically.
Yeah, and one of the things that is helpful, I think, is that for people in the millennial generation, there haven't been that many millennials who have made it into high government office yet. And oftentimes, I think people fall into this conceit of if we got some young people in there, then things would change. Just people in our generation, people who relate to media the way we relate to it or something. And then you see, well, what kinds of people from your generation get
Yes,
in?
exactly.
And what kinds of lives did they live? Because you probably did know some people not altogether different from these guys, and they
Right.
aren't the people that you would have picked, perhaps. Uh, Hegseth was born in 1980, so he's the bleeding edge of millennial. And the thing that sticks out to me, not just the stuff that happened when he was in the Veterans Administration, is that this is a guy who tried a couple of different times to have a political career and would get stopped in the Republican primaries. This is a guy who couldn't make it through a Republican primary in the tens. And it was because he tried a couple of times to have a political career and couldn't get that to happen that he ended up pivoting over to the Fox job.
Mm.
So you have to think about why is it that these Republicans, when they took a hard look at him in these primary processes, why did they not pick him? And then they forgot about the reasons they didn't pick him when they saw him on TV for a few years, because they liked the things he said on TV. And this is something that does come up sometimes in the administration. Elon Musk said this to Rubio in allegedly in the meeting that Donald Trump denies took place. That
This one?
Rubio is good on TV. Different meeting. This was an in-person meeting involving the president, in which the media has reported there was infighting, particularly between Musk and Rubio.
Oh.
Trump denies this. He claims that this is a fake story. But according to the story, Musk said to Rubio that he's good on TV, or he said about Rubio in front of Rubio that Rubio is good on TV. The implication being that he's not good at much else. And this does seem to be one of the things that comes up in this administration is this thought that some of these people were picked because of their television presence, in part because Donald Trump watches a lot of television and tends to judge people by how they appear on television.
Right.
So the things that Hegseth said on television got him a lot of positive attention from Trump. But prior to that point, when he was looking to run for office, it didn't go through. In 2016, during the first administration, Hegseth got some consideration for Secretary of Veterans Affairs. But veterans themselves opposed his pick. And because he was opposed by so many veterans, Trump didn't pick him in 2016 for that post. And according to a story from the Washington Post from that decision, Hegseth's lack of experience in operating a large organization was itself pointed to as part of why he wasn't ultimately picked. What changed is that he then went and appeared on TV, and he was on TV for a while, and Trump watches a lot of TV.
Okay.
And he liked the TV appearances.
That's kind of. Hold on one second. Plugging something in. That's the nice little segue over to what I said I wanted to get into with the content versus form thing on the medium. Trump is very much like a TV born and raised kind of guy. Also, of course, he became famous through his image on television. His success is largely based in that image. Of course, we always, especially in critical media theory, will play off of, well, there's also something about the medium where he's able to cut across through something like Twitter and really game the system, kind of mess things up in terms of the attention economy. So it's like he's kind of this between figure, Trump is. And so you said he's not super active in that chat, right? I think he just sent some emojis saying like...
No, Trump is not in the chat at all. Trump does not even... He's not in that chat. That chat is not inclusive of Trump. Indeed, it said at one point that Trump has 24 hours to potentially decide that he doesn't want to do the strike, and it's in Trump's hands whether to ultimately decide. So he has a 24-hour decision window, but no, Trump is not in the chat at all, which is why when it's brought to Trump, he goes, this is the first I'm hearing about it, because he wasn't even in the chat. And so, of course, it is literally the first he's hearing about it because he genuinely was not in the chat. He
Yeah.
doesn't do that kind of chat. That's way too young a medium for him. He doesn't go near that. Biden also, by the way, was very much a TV guy and obsessively watched Morning Joe.
I was told, oh, I can't hold this up there, but in the thumbnail for this video, you see the emojis, and I actually have those coming from Trump's mouth because I thought when I looked at that Atlantic article briefly, which, by the way, it was paywalled and I never actually got to the other side of the paywall. I was told that, my impression was that had been his only contribution was the fist pump emoji, followed by the American flag emoji, followed by the flame emoji. But was that someone else?
I believe that was someone else.
Okay.
I think that, Trump, I don't think does any of that.
Okay, well then allow me to correct the
terms of
record,
emojis.
everybody. Yeah, let me correct the record then, folks. That he does not actually
I just
say that.
thought that you were using it metaphorically as him standing in for the administration there.
Okay, well then we can just keep using it as a metaphor. And just so you all know, we're not fake news because we do correct the record. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry that you couldn't look at all of it. There was a period of time where the Atlantic was giving it out as a gift link. So they were allowing people around the paywall. And I think in their imaginarium, this was a tremendous gift to everybody.
Yeah, I'm sure. I wish
When
I
sharing the link, there was a sharing of a gift. It was a kind of gift thing.
I would like to, I'd like to have an email dedicated to news and actually just get access to everything that is currently paywalled. And I've actually fantasized about figuring out, well, how much would that actually cost? And then just actually setting it up. I'll probably start by, this is actually news for everybody. But I plan on getting a subscription to The Week so that I can actually try to keep up with The Week a little bit, get ushered into your little media universe here a little bit,
Oh, cool. Yeah, that'll be fun. Because I'm sure some stuff will stick out to you as just completely out there in The Week.
Yeah, it'd be fun to do.
The latest issue of The Week is a cover of a donkey with two heads on it. And one of them is ridden by AOC and the other one is ridden by Schumer. And they're both looking at each other going, what are you up to? Because the donkey can't move because of its two sides.
Oh, yeah. And it's probably torn over Palestine. Is that the angle that they take?
No, Palestine has nothing to do with it. It's about resistance to Trump and what the strategy is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see.
No, they're not. They don't care about Palestine. That's not the focus.
Okay. Of course not. I do hear elder Democrats talking a lot about how anti-Semitic this new generation of Democrats often is, and it's in backing Hamas is always how they frame it. In being anti-Jewish is always how they frame it. But that's a whole other conversation that would be good to get into. But for right now, on the Medium thing, so I was talking about Trump being this TV guy who obviously broke into the Twitter universe. And then here's this generation of millennials coming in, as Weird Solowski said in chat, millennial government, Pete, JD, Tulsi, Cash. And, so they're going to be using these other media forms. Whoa. I guess kind of what I wanted to focus on here with this is the instantaneity kind of communication where the others are all just constantly on standby in this group space where I guess and we've talked about this a lot in CMT, the phone makes all spaces kind of feel the same. Like you might be on different platforms and they're technically different, but they feel the same, which is to say it feels instantaneous, like you should, and it feels friction free, and it feels intimate, even though it's obviously kind of the opposite. It's the most invasive thing in the world. So that intimacy, obviously, you see it played out like on Joe Rogan Experience, where they're having these sort of intimate conversations kind of without an audience. Like they kind of just imagine there's no audience. They act like there's no audience in the room. It's not like Joe Rogan ever turns and says, "That's right, America, you just heard it here." No, he's not doing that sort of Daily Show thing. And so the internet is like this sort of fake intimacy. And then something that I've been saying for I don't know, at least a decade to activist friends. No, I will not communicate with you over Signal. I do not believe in pretending or reifying this idea that we're actually having intimate private conversations. I don't care if it's encrypted. It's not private. Like, just get out of that mindset, because this whole thing was built by what became the CIA. Like, the internet was built by it. We're not going to pretend.
I've always had the same view. Yeah, if you're on the internet, you should assume that it's not private. If you want to have a private conversation, get together in real life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, none of this fake intimacy stuff. But point being, it's easy to do. It's relatable. I think everybody kind of feels it in their own ways. And so I just really wanted to drive home the interesting part about the medium here. It's like, we're inside out. And not only are we inside out, but everybody kind of feels an anxiety about that. And now that anxiety just got amplified, right? Because the most secret conversations are being held over something like Signal. It's not safe, guys. Don't do it. Definitely don't plan anything crazy over Signal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be such a headache for them. I'm sure they were using it a lot of the time without telling anybody about it. That's why nobody goes, hey, are we sure that we should be having it here?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Such a headache for them.
So on Yemen and the Houthis, we've not talked about that at all on this show. It'd be cool to get a little synopsis of how you understand the situation there. But my thing is, I think I was listening to Michael Tracy briefly talking to somebody else about this, and because, like I said, I didn't read the Atlantic piece on this past the paywall, but they did, or maybe it was the follow-up release of the entirety. But apparently Pete says to Vance that it's not, I think this is right, that it's not about the Houthis even. It's about restoring deterrence in Yemen. And so is that significant to you? Should we be thinking, is there something going on here between what they are publicly saying about the Houthis and then and how they're thinking about deterrence?
Yeah, it shouldn't sound as esoteric as perhaps it does if you don't know very much about what's going on.
Yeah.
So Yemen, there's a civil conflict in Yemen, and the civil conflict has become a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So the Houthis are Iran-backed, and the other government is Saudi-backed, and there has been a flood of weapons into Yemen from Iran, and then there's been a bunch of bombing of Yemen by Saudi Arabia. And this, Saudi Arabia dropping a bunch of bombs from the sky, and meanwhile, more weapons flowing in from Iran has caused this conflict to just go on and on and on. And it has had a certain utility, similar to Ukraine, for the American arms sector, because there's a continuous demand from Saudi Arabia to buy American weapons. The Saudis are extremely terrified of the Iranians, regard the Iranians as posing an existential threat to them. If you remember, way back during WikiLeaks, there was a bit where King Abdullah, who's gone now, repeatedly tried to get the Americans to cut off the head of the snake to kill the Ayatollah. So the Saudis really, really do not like the Iranians, consider the Iranians a major problem. And Iran has a huge population relative to Saudi Arabia. It's a much bigger country with much higher theoretical potential than Saudi Arabia in terms of political power. The Saudis have been able to punch above their weight because of the value of their oil wealth, but most of the country is desert. The population is small, and a sizable percentage of the Saudi population is foreign laborers held in extraordinarily brutal conditions. Okay. So it's not like Saudi Arabia has the material capacity to punch evenly with Iran. The way that Saudi Arabia is able to contend is by bringing in other states and creating an alliance structure to try to contain Iran. And this is the dependence point for Saudi Arabia on the United States. Saudi Arabia needs the United States to help it contain Iran, and therefore Saudi Arabia has to help the United States maintain security in the Middle East. And this dynamic is frustrating for both parties in various ways, but has been the general tenor of it. Prior to the outbreak of the conflict of the latest round of conflict in Palestine, the the Saudis were considering normalizing relations with Israel as part of constructing this deterrence system against Iran. So the aim was to get the states that were previously in conflict over Israel-Palestine into an alignment against Iran so that Israel and the Saudis would both be aligned against Iran and would not have problems with each other. In the face of the attack on October 7th and the subsequent stuff, it's become more difficult for these Arab states to buddy up with Israel against Iran, even though many of them want to for various reasons. The Houthis, who are Iran-backed, are one of the groups that has tried to open up additional fronts or to create additional stress on Israel. You might have previously heard about the whole thing in Lebanon with Hezbollah, where Hezbollah was attempting to open a second front, and then it turned out that Hezbollah had been penetrated by Israeli intelligence, and therefore Israel was able to very easily greatly weaken Hezbollah's position and force Hezbollah out of the conflict relatively quickly. The Houthis play a similar role to Hezbollah in that they try to create another theater of contestation, and it's mainly directed at the ships, the container ships that go up the Red Sea through the Suez and then over to Europe. The Houthis have tried to create a security problem in that area so that people who are trying to ship goods are not sure that they'll be safe if they go through the Red Sea, and therefore they have to go, if they don't go through the Red Sea, all the way around the Horn of Africa and then through the Strait of Gibraltar, which adds significant expense. It means a lot more oil. It means more time for stuff to ship. The supply chains have to be reconfigured so that you continue to keep things flowing in on the relevant schedule. It was annoying, and it was one of the things in recent years that has depressed European growth. So to go after the Houthis, it's not just a question of trying to restore navigability or help the Europeans. It's also about the Iranians, and it's about restoring deterrence against the Iranians, because from the American point of view, everything the Houthis do is, in some sense, Iranian activity. So everything the Houthis do, whether the Houthis claim to be doing it independently or not, whether the Iranians would frame Houthi activity as independent or not, is alleged to be Iranian activity. And now it's not totally clear to what degree the Houthis do act independently and to what degree they act under the Iranians. One of the questions is how much control does Iran actually have over its alleged proxies? And certainly the Iranians will claim that they don't control what the proxies do. The United States doesn't believe that. The United States holds Iran responsible for everything the alleged proxies do. So therefore, going after the Houthis is also a tat on the Iranians. Dave, you're muted. I can't hear you.
Oh, that means that all of my supportive and noises that I was making while you were
Yeah, I
talking,
didn't get any of that.
all of that was lost. I'm still getting used to the setup in here. Do you know where I am, Benjamin?
You're in Phoenix, right?
Yeah. Do you recognize this this background behind me?
Yeah, it looks like where Nance typically communicates from.
Yeah, that's right. And so everybody in the chat, every time it said Nance says something, that was actually me. I'm just logged in on his thing. So hello in the chat from Nance. It's really Dave. But yeah, I'm here in his space and it's epic, but it's a little not something I'm used to. So, but what was I saying about Yemen and the Houthis and the
Yeah, so I said every time it's a tat on the Iranians, every time they go after the Houthis.
Right. So trying to ramp up deterrence on Yemen means ramping up deterrence on Iran, is what that's about.
Yes, it's connected intimately to that.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, and look at that. We've got him right now coming in the space here. Hey, everybody, look who it is. Hey, it's Ned's.
What's up, everybody? What's up, Benjamin?
Hey, Nance, good to see you.
Yeah, man. This is a good episode. I'll be honest with you. This this Houthi stuff has been kind of too hard for me to care about, and I, you know how it goes. Like it's just too much, and I don't have the bandwidth. But I like.
This is something they actually expressed worries about in the group chat, that you guys, you Americans, ordinary people, don't understand who the Houthis are or why they matter, and you won't be inclined to support this activity because you don't know anything about them. This is something that they raised in the group chat as a problem.
Dude.
Yeah.
Dude.
They're like, I don't think Nance has the bandwidth for this one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, though, it seems like they're having better planning sessions by group chat than we ever have. You know, we actually have to have phone calls. We can't really seem to do it in the group chat so much. But yeah. I think in the last bit here, I don't know how much we want to go into it. We wanted to at least address the question that Sean Middlestat was asking you earlier. But really quick, I just want to, anything remaining on this, I just want to say, look, the porkyification, right, is absolutely wild. Especially the idea that the Trump administration is organizing Doge, which is supposed to eradicate inefficiencies. But then someone like Pete Hegseth, I remember what I wanted to say about the medium here, actually. There was something else I wanted to say about it. Okay, but
Keg's breath.
Yeah.
Keg breath.
Keg breath. Yeah, Pete Keg breath over here. No, the thing is that what the medium does is it presents what's absent. Right? That's representation. And of course, writing presents what's absent. Language does that. But also television does that. Every medium does that in some other way. It makes present that which is absent. The medium, the root there gets at this sense, the same word for mediation. And so it's a mediation between us and reality. And there's this idea that Trump gets all of his ideas from Fox News, or that he gets a lot of his worldview from just watching a lot of Fox News. And it's like, not only that, but he feels like he knows people and what they're capable of because he watched them on the tube. That was the thing I was driving at. And the thing is nowadays, the same thing is true with television. Right? Like, I won't be surprised at all if someone like Hassan Piker is on MSNBC or CNN here in the next 5 to 10 years, right? Because he has friends at CNN, they collaborate. Elon Musk tweeted out that Hassan is a fraud just a few days ago, right? And so it's like, here's a person who's just a Twitch streamer. No, he's not. He's being referred to by Musk, right? There's this way that the internet cuts out across these old media hierarchies and in setting up new ones. And someone like Pete Hegseth, even though he's supremely unqualified for a position like this, was able to build trust just by being the mediator, the mediating presence, the messenger that Trump was seeing. And that's wild to me. But the thing is for guys like JD Vance, it's us here on YouTube. It's us here on Twitch, right? Like, we're already cutting across these old media and breaking out into them as well, right? So a lot of the interesting stuff that'll happen over the next 10 to 20 years will be ways that people that you feel like and that you've built up some kind of parasocial relation to over time are going to be moving to these legacy media institutions. Mr. Beast getting a show, I think, on Netflix, right? There's also that new show, Logan and Jake Paul. It's about the family. I think it's called like Family Logan or Logan Family or something like that. But those are YouTubers. Like, it's sure they're also an MMA, but they're YouTubers. And now they get their own shows. They become a part of the conversation. And the thing is as the circus unfolds, the likelihood of someone who you would not have known if you're only watching traditional media popping up in a cabinet is actually not that unlikely, right? Because they watch YouTube too. All kinds of people watch it. Only a certain kind of person actually engages in the live chat, and that's usually a person with some surplus time Maybe they're sitting in the bathroom at their job. Maybe they have a kind of job where they get to be on here. And of course, a lot of these people who are very upperly mobile and busy aren't in the live chat, but they do see this stuff, right? Remember, like, so What's Left, JD Vance was on What's Left, right? Here we are on Why
Yes, he
Left,
was.
the continuation of that very show. So it's interesting how, yeah, I would like to think that you are definitely qualified for a kind of consultant position for anybody in government or what have you. But we nobodies have the opportunity to, just by being familiar faces, like Pete Hegs, I always say it wrong, Hegseth, we have the ability to actually feel trusted, or like that we could be called on. And I think that's a kind of an interesting possibility. Maybe it's an opportunity, but also everybody, it should feel like, if it does feel like an opportunity at all, then that should feel like all the more reason to take studying political theory and philosophy as seriously as so many of you already are. Like, the reason we do this is because if we have a working class intellectual renaissance in America, then that means that they won't just be able to just assume an audience of people who just go for either of these two traditional avenues within the duopoly, and that, oh, we can assume a lot just based off of your class background. No, actually, you could be an Amazon worker who's been paying close attention to everything going on and educating yourself for 20 years. And you could actually write the definitive book that causes some kind of a serious impact, because the world's a lot smaller than we think it is. And I think that that's kind of what this whole thing about the inversion of the medium teaches us.
Yeah. And sometimes, of course, they play test stuff for younger people by taking people and sticking them in the younger space. So Hassan Piker is, his uncle is the Young Turks guy.
Right.
So in his case, it's very much, let's take this Young Turks thing and see if we can find new legs in it by making it younger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and they were making it, I mean, he had like this little uber USSR aestheticized podcast, I think. It was called something Agitprop, or maybe it was just called Agitprop. This was Hassan back in, I think, 2020. And at that point, he ended up doing a debate with Cenk, his uncle, right? But now, yeah, he, for instance, in that hit piece CNN did, that hit piece on Haas's organization, what is it called? The CPA or whatever, the MAGA communist people. CNN did this hit piece. And I call it a hit piece because I actually tracked it down and watched it. And they leave Haas out of it the entire time, even though it's his organization. They focused everything on Jackson Hinkle in moments where he looked incredibly dorkish. And then the person who they went home with and interviewed was a random streamer from the audience who was wearing a Hawaiian shirt and khaki shorts. Just some random streamer that was like, a small orbiter of the infrared community. And so, Haas told me they did a long form interview with him, and then they just cut him entirely from the doc, right? Well, this was all just set up for me to let you all know. First of all, CNN did a hit piece on Haas, or at least his organization, mostly by leaving him out of it. It's fascinating. Definitely check that out. Definitely just makes them all sound like reactionary ex-Bernie bros. That's the angle that they take. But they bring in Hassan Piker, who then talks about the alt-right pipeline into the manosphere and how dangerous it is, and how he's there to try to catch people. And so they are, and the guy who brought him on, his friend at CNN, who's doing this whole piece, whose name is escaping me in the moment, is working to try to set Hassan up as the alternative to the alt-right pipeline, the good version.
Yeah, because they just think of you as in a pipeline. They think of you as just somebody whose movement and whose intellectual direction they can predict and anticipate, and then they can insert figures in who intercept you and redirect you. They think it all is very straightforward and predictable because they think you're predictable. And this is, I think, a big part of what it is that we are trying to disrupt. Not that we are trying to intercept you and direct you down a different path, but we are trying to make it so that you aren't subject to paths.
And I think and I think it's as much about making it so that a viewer of, say, this content, for instance, any of you in the audience, has more alternatives for your own navigation in this world, right? Which I think concepts are liberating in that sense. Conceptual distinctions and clarity are helpful in that sense. It's empowerment, really. It helps you move through life. But also to short circuit the relations of production that currently maintain the mode of production. To short circuit by making it difficult for people who've been to college to just assume that they really can just, oh yeah, you haven't read anything, you don't know what you're talking about, right? Like, actually, I'm pretty sure right now, it might not be at that point where it's kind of caught on, where they're aware that underground theorists are a thing. But I think in 5 to 10 years, it'll become painstakingly obvious. And I'm going off of the way students are today, where a tremendous number of students today are using AI unabashedly, allowing it to do their thinking for it, which is very different from using it as an editor, which is totally okay. But if you're using it to do your thinking for you on homework, and then you're like, this is supposed to be the legitimation narrative for your position in the relations of production, how much imposter syndrome are you going to feel when you meet workers who spend 8 to 12 hours a day listening to philosophy, politics, and theory? Right.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are in for a rude awakening on that score. If you use AI to get your position in society, you're not going to be able to execute it very well. And you're going to have a lot of trouble sticking in that position or going where you want to go ultimately over time. But it's a short term, just trying to stay alive thing. And it happens in part because of the imposter syndrome. It's because people feel like they can't do what they are doing, that they deploy the AI, which then puts them in situations where they are even less sure about what they're doing. And when you're insecure and you don't really know anything, that's when you start trying to claim that you do know everything. That's when you start getting dogmatic and preaching in terms of certainties. And I think certainly at least our listeners, I hope, will be able to challenge this stuff. You know, the way I describe the situation in Yemen, there's a lot of different positions you could have with respect to this that have a lot to do with the way you see the world and what you care about when you look at that situation. I've tried to describe it to you in such a way that you can decide how to feel about it and what particular values you think ought to be determinative in deciding how we feel about it. I haven't told you how to feel about it. I've just told you what it is that they're thinking and what it is that they're trying to do. Whether you agree or don't agree with what they're trying to do, you know, is something you actually have the capacity to decide. You really do. And this is what they don't believe about you. They don't think you can decide. They think that you have to be told what to like and what not to like and what to value and what not to value.
100%. Do you want to come back to talk about Sean right after a commercial break?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, everybody, we'll be right back right after this.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Theory Underground exists to cultivate the conditions necessary for a working-class intellectual renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitarian niches. At TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis, spread out throughout the year of 2025. Those courses are 12 Core Concepts and the Fundamental Problems with the Situation Today with social theorist David McCarricker, 12 Essential Political Thinkers with political theorist Benjamin Studebaker, and The Philosophy of Nature with philosopher Nina Power.
The way these all get woven together at a deeper and more meta level is through the ongoing research seminars led by David McCarricker, Benjamin Studebaker, and Michael Downs, where they engage with one another's work by sharing developments from their own perspectives, theory, and research. If you subscribe at higher levels and support our work, we'll support your development with bespoke teaching. Alone and unaided, we struggle to grasp our situation in its fullness and formulate a meaningful response. By working together and pooling our energies, we can do better. Join us at theoryunderground.com/subscribe.
There'll be two kinds of people in 10 years. Those who said, I knew all along Theory Underground was going to make this huge difference. Those are the people that are like Nance, who were on the sidelines at one point and then said, nah, I'm going to get in. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to go hard. And then there's another kind of person, a person who waits in the wings, collects receipts, and who will say in 10 years, oh yeah, I was there. I saw that happen. And then they'll gossip monger. Listen, if you want to get involved, get involved. But if you're going to sit there in the bleachers, well, here's some popcorn. I hope you have fun.
And we're back. What's up, everybody?
All
Welcome
right.
back. Oh, and Nance is popping in again. So what we're about to do here is sort of like a B-side, even though we kind of changed how we do things on this podcast, and I'll say something about that in a second. But are you kind of coming to hang, or did you just want to shout out something real quick?
I don't know where you at.
Well, we're just starting an episode on Sean Middlestat's question about the similarities between Trump and Obama. And so
What do they agree on?
yeah, Benjamin's got some. What do they agree on? Yeah, and so Benjamin's got some thoughts on that, and then I was thinking we could just kind of riff. And then I definitely want to plug our upcoming courses and seminar stuff this weekend. It's going to be really cool. We've got a special lecture from Benjamin on Aquinas and a special lecture from Nina Power on Menon. I think I said Menent, and she was like, "Oh, Menon," and I was like, yeah, that makes more sense, Menon." But then also Mary Harrington, right? And so it'll be a critique of, basically a critique of human rights and liberalism and a defense of natural rights. So of course it's going to be a little edgy in that sense. Some people will be very averse to this or whatever, but I really want people to think deeply about Menon's position, because he says a lot of things that I've wondered. Whenever I hear people talking political theory, a lot of times there's certain things that I'll think, and maybe they're like things that I've picked up from Marxism along the way or something like that. But there's certain ideas I'll think that liberals tend to not consider or take seriously, and it seems like Menon is reading my mind, but then like expounding and developing these positions in a way that it's like, I don't care if you're a pure social constructivist, egalitarian, you need to read it. You need to take it seriously. You need to tarry with the negative, actually sit with this. And so Mary Harrington and Menon this Sunday, I think, is when we've got the lecture from Nina Power. And then this Saturday, we've got a special lecture from Benjamin on Aquinas and Mikey's seminar. Mikey's going to be doing a seminar on basically cyborgs and AI. And so it's going to be something directly related to his brand new book that just came out last week. We had the book launch. Everyone should know about that already. Capital versus Time Energy. Get it now. It just got its first review on Amazon. It was probably like the coolest review I've ever read, which I'll actually read out here over this live broadcast, because it's actually sort of like this world is. Oh, you got it. Benjamin's holding it up.
Oh,
Sick.
yeah. That's
Sick.
cool. That's cool, Benjamin.
It is cool.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can pull up this this review. You saw it, right? You've got a hand. Maybe you've got it.
You. Here you go.
Where the hell is it?
I got you. Hold on
You
one
got
second.
it. Nance will read it with his amazing Nance reading voice. I saw him working for Audible this morning, actually.
Yeah. By an Amazon user.
Called Sturmaderm.
Sturmaderm.
That's the name of that person, so yeah.
5 stars, verified purchase. The revolution will not come from accredited institutions. Michael Downs is arguably the most important name in philosophy. This text will be read and reread for generations. There is nobody else out there with the ability to deliver syncretic philosophical exegesis to working class people. Short and sweet, but excellent.
Yeah. So get it while it's hot, folks, which will be for the next 100 years. So there's that. And then we also got this epic photo of somebody holding all of our books together. That thing is so cool. It's got Royal Flush. That was shared in the Discord server, but it's got your book there, Benjamin. And then it's got Time Energy. So it's got legitimacy in liberal democracies, Time Energy, Underground Theory, Capital versus Time Energy. It's just like all in a stack, and it just says Royal Flush. It's awesome. But anyway, all right, that's enough big upping all of those things. But do you want to say anything about Aquinas before we dive into the similarities between, or the agreements between Obama and Trump?
I'm really excited to do the Aquinas episode because I think a lot of the preconceived notions that people have about religious people, about people who care about God or people who care about nature, come in some way from engagements with things that are downstream from Aquinas. A lot of the confusion that exists is very much in relation to Aquinas and Thomism and various different iterations of Thomism, because of course there have been lots of different kinds of Thomism that have taken Aquinas up in slightly different ways. This is, I think, a really, really big leverage point. When Aquinas comes out in that 13th century, it creates a series of events that we're still living with. The things that Thomism did to Catholicism, and then what that kind of Catholicism provoked in terms of Protestantism, humanism, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment. We're still living with all of this. We still have not gotten out from under this. And the Thomism gets read back into everything before it. So it has very much shaped a lot of what people think exists out there. So it's definitely going to be a key lecture in the course. Don't sleep on these medievals, guys. They're very important. Everything that you might find interesting about modernity came from, in some way, getting bothered by these medievals. Getting upset with them, reacting to some of the things that they do.
That's why Descartes is a fundamental critique of what he calls scholasticism, right? That's
right. And then, of course, if that scholasticism has certain, limits to it, if it has excluded certain things that came before, then that stuff that came before that's excluded by that scholasticism is forgotten about and not really appropriately dealt with. And then, when you're trying to go back to those early ancient thinkers to try to get around scholasticism, there's always the issue with, well, the scholastics took them up and did certain things with them.
right.
And so how do you get back to the non-scholasticized iterations of that? Yeah, and a lot of modern Enlightenment thought is very prejudicial with respect to everything that comes before Aquinas because of the degree to which it is viewed as somehow necessarily having led to that.
I think Heidegger agrees with this so much that he kind of just wants to throw out everything that Latin had to say about the Greeks. He just wants to be like, okay, can we clear away all of the stuff that the Latinification did to these texts and just get down into the Greek? And this because he becomes such a word guy in the last half of his life. He becomes like this. It's almost, really, it's kind of like etymology, guys, but it's also kind of poetic. And
Philology.
No one really trusts it too much. Like, no one trusts his philological integrity that much because especially as he becomes more of a guru in his later years, he just becomes more prone to being like, oh, this is the original meaning of this term. And he goes off of something that's like a myth. And it's like, where are you getting that from, man? You're having too much fun and you're not being rigorous anymore.
And for him, it's John Duns Scotus. He gets really miffed at John Duns Scotus in particular, who's another medieval that will not be so much the focus of this talk, but definitely somebody people should be aware of, one of the big players from that period.
Well, I admit to having slept on the medievals. I blame some of my favorite professors for just kind of skipping them and never really showing us the value. I look forward to seeing what you have to show us about this. And I also hope to maybe during a reverse seminar in the near future, when we all get to ask you questions, pick your brains on existing tendencies within Catholicism and the kinds of conferences that center around the classicists as well, or the classical thinkers, as well as these sort of middle-age thinkers. But the last thing I want to say on the Aquinas course before we get into it is just that it's just a cute little aside. Anne is really excited for your lecture on Aquinas. And I told you why already, but everybody, it's because we have a cat that we named Thomas Aquinas. And Anne did not know anything about him when she chose the name. She was just asking me philosopher names because we named our older cat, he's like a year older, we named him Ryan Gosling. And there's a funny story about why we did that, blah, blah, blah. You can call him the Gauze, which is pretty cool. But no, we wanted like a intellectual name for the next cat. And so Anne was just like picking my brains and like asking for names. And she was actually torn between Kierkegaard and Aquinas. And I was like, that's actually Protestantism versus Catholicism in a sort of sense. Like they could be metonyms for these two tendencies. And she's like, she was really torn on it, but she eventually chose Thomas Aquinas. And now it made her like way more interested in your lecture because she wants like she wants the deets. She wants to be able to theory pill or philosophy pill her friends and family whenever they ask about Thomas Aquinas, because so far it's always just been like, oh, he's a famous philosopher. And then people go, oh, okay. And it gets left at that.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We're going to do the crisis that gave rise to this. Why did it become necessary? Why did it have to be this way? And we'll get into the thought as well. But I think a lot of people who have some passing familiarity with Aquinas don't understand what came before him that necessitated something like him. Why is it that something like him had to happen? And then why is it that was taken up to the degree that it was? To understand that, you have to understand medieval Christianity before Thomas Aquinas. The early and middle part of the Middle Ages, before you get into the thing which seems to be obviously leading into what we call early modernity. What was the 11th century like? What was the 12th century like? Why is it that you get this mess in the 1200s?
Well, I look forward to finding out. So yeah, Sean's one of our members here at TU. He was actually the first person up for the turn, which, by the way, has been in hiatus because of the tour and Benjamin's conference travels. But once we were all kind of grounded again, we plan on doing another turn. I'm excited to announce who the next person's going to be. But for right now, yeah, Sean, this came up, right? So shout out to Sean. You want to share how this came about, or any thoughts you have on it?
Yeah, so Sean, because he's a member, is in our Discord, and he can message me. And he asked me a question. He said, he'd been thinking about this stuff, and he wanted to know kind of what it is that Trump and Obama would agree on, where are their points of agreement. And he felt that this is something that we haven't really addressed directly. And he came up with, I think, a major part of the answer on his own, which is the pivot to Asia. So, of course, Obama articulated a need for a pivot to Asia, and initially even a desire to reset relations with Russia and bring Russia in on the pivot. Trump also is interested in this pivot to Asia, and Trump is also in some way interested in resetting relations with Russia to try to involve or bring Russia in some way on the pivot at this stage. Now, at this point, Obama would have a different position with regard to Russia and a different position specifically with regard to the Ukraine conflict. But both of them are interested in a pivot to Asia, and a pivot to Asia has certain requirements. There are certain things that it implies. And because it has certain requirements and things that it implies, there's a lot that Trump and Obama are in agreement about, even though there are some disagreements about precisely how to deal with each of these things. So one very central part of this is that the Europeans need to take a larger role in providing for security in Europe so that more American resources can be deployed in Asia. A related point is that you need some kind of settlement in the Middle East. You need some kind of stability in the Middle East so that you don't have to be directing a bunch of resources to that region. So there's an interest on the part of both of them in creating some kind of effective system in the Middle East for managing security there. The difference is a question about Iran, really, and whether Iran should be engaged with diplomatically or whether Iran should be used as a point of unification to bring Israel, Saudi Arabia, and some of these other states into cooperation with each other. In a way, it's an inverse of the debate that's had about Russia now.
Okay.
So Trump is interested in diplomatically engaging the Russians and cutting a deal. The Democrats are interested in continuing to fight the Russians to use this to get the Europeans to unite and commit to providing security in the region. On the question of Iran, the sides are reversed. So with Iran, you have Obama and the Democrats interested in cutting a deal and an engagement. And you've got Trump interested in using Iran as a boogeyman threat to get the states in the region to come together and provide more security for the region. So they're different there, but they're different in a way which also leaves them quite similar. And then, of course, what is this ultimately in service of? It's ultimately in service of a greater commitment in Asia, which means more trade, more cooperation with states in Asia that are near China and are potential friends. So this means current allies. If you look at that, and people never pay attention to this, but the way Trump, Obama, Biden, how do they interact with Japan? How do they interact with Korea? They are extraordinarily warm and friendly toward the allied states in the Pacific. They are always chummy and broy with the allied states. And then you've also got this interest in cultivating new friendships. And this is an interest that they all have, that they have with respect to India, with respect to the Philippines. Lots of interest in friendship and in promoting new ties. Some differences, because Obama was interested in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would have been a free trade agreement, and Trump is trying to drive business out of China. And in the course of doing this, some of these other states become the beneficiaries of that activity. But this is something that they're both looking to do, and it's a question of emphasis where you would see the difference. It's not that there's a totally different worldview or a completely different kind of world system that is being envisioned. It's broadly the same objective: put the United States in a strong position in East Asia so that it can potentially contain any Chinese activity in the region. And to do that, find some kind of way of stabilizing Europe and the Middle East so that the United States does not have to be as heavily involved in those two regions. There are other points of agreement. Obama, for instance, was the deporter-in-chief. He was the one who focused the most of any recent U.S. president on deporting people so as to strengthen security at the southern border. In the first term, Obama deported an enormous number of people, and Donald Trump has yet to achieve annual deportation figures anything like the Obama-era figures. Even with what we've been hearing about recently, it doesn't look like they're on pace to hit the Obama deportation figures from that first administration. Though we'll see. Maybe they'll be able to do it. We'll have to find out. And there's also a willingness to do stimulus in a time of crisis. The COVID stimulus measures that Trump did in 2020 were very much the kinds of measures that you would have seen if a Democrat were president during that time. There was a shared interest in doing infrastructure spending, but debates about whether this should be done through incentives for the private sector or direct state spending. There's also an interest in supporting the U.S. Industrial production, particularly anything related to arms, warfare, security. So both of these guys are great friends to people like Anduril. They're great friends to people like Taiwanese Semiconductor. The industries that are directly related to national security and to the military capability of the United States. They want those industries in the United States, and they want them strong and powerful. And that's something that there's a total agreement about at this stage. But then how do you generate this? Well, you need some states to be, you don't want this to all be an increase in U.S. defense spending. That's difficult. That's hard to sell politically. That creates budget questions. What you want to do is you want to get the allied states buying the weapons. Because if the allied states are putting up the money, then you don't have to increase defense spending, and yet you get enhanced military capability.
And this
But then which states should buy the weapons? Should they be Middle Eastern states? Should they be European states? Who
Right.
should be doing the spending first and how much? That's where you start to get into the weeds and into some of the disagreement.
Right. And this is one of the things I appreciate about what you've brought to Theory Underground, especially in the last, well, since we started Why Left, with more of this contemporary emphasis. We always do kind of bring it back to what I think we started referring to just last week, because I don't think we used the term really before you brought it up in seminar, but regime politics is ultimately the thing that you have to understand if you're confused about where we're coming from. I'm not saying that we agree on everything or whatever, but me and well, Benjamin, Nance, Mikey, any of the TU people, Nina, we all are in one way or another thinking the regime itself, though, is in large part in agreement. And people want to tend to focus on these little issues that might be very big issues for some people, but nevertheless are tiny in comparison to the actual global system, its relations, and the mode of production. So typically, yeah, where we talk about where they agree on things versus where they disagree, it's going to be like, well, but Obama has decorum. Obama has the kind of face, voice, and personality of someone that you would want your child to grow up to be or be with, or be, you would trust him with people. He puts out something admirable, like an image that's admirable. Like it's something to aspire towards, versus McDonald's reality TV show guy, right? Like Mr. just says whatever comes to his mind guy. And so people will focus on these differences. Trump will be called a fascist, whereas Obama will be called a communist in the extreme cases. But then if people were to sit there and say, well, what do they agree on? I don't actually know what most people's answers to that would be, and I'd be fascinated. But I can say for sure that most people are not going to go to the regime stuff or to the foreign policy matters, which is why it's so easy to focus on the differences, and we could call it maybe a narcissism of small differences, right? These things that get blown so out of proportion.
When you're running in an election against somebody, you have to emphasize the points of difference to be able to get people to care about the election. If you emphasize points of similarity, then what is the point of the election? Whoever you vote for, you're going to get the pivot to Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And if the pivot to Asia is what you care about and what you're thinking about, then the election wouldn't seem very consequential to you. But if you're thinking about some of these other things, maybe you care very much about the specific strategy that's used to execute the pivot. But the thing is, a lot of the time, even when people care about foreign policy, they don't think about it in terms of which strategy are you going to use to execute the pivot. They're imagining these different foreign policy crises in isolation from each other. And they're thinking they can apply something like just a desire for peace to a particular crisis without really thinking about why it is that the people in question, if they do want peace, why do they want it? What are they trying to use the peace to achieve in terms of the pivot? Because all peace in Europe or in the Middle East nonetheless serves the pivot, and therefore nonetheless serves this confrontation with China that they are both at minimum looking to give us the capacity to have. So yeah, I think that's and then of course, we could start getting into the economy and some of the stuff internally in terms of that. But yes, people will focus on the stuff that they're using to win the election. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't sizable disagreements that could, in fact, take place. One of the points that's often made is that Trump is a moderate in the MAGA movement, that there are some people on some issues who are more divergent from the standard Washington consensus. And in the group chat, Vance is the example of the person who isn't sure he wants to help the Europeans with this. Obama or Trump, either one of them would have helped the Europeans with this. But Vance goes, do we really want to help the Europeans with this? Now, he's not so sure that he doesn't want to help the Europeans that he will publicly oppose the action. He wants to be in this administration. He's not so out of conformity or alignment with it that he's unable to be the vice president or unable to be in the administration. But he does have a somewhat different view with regard to Europe from many of these other people who are more prepared ultimately to continue to support the Europeans. But for this very reason, Vance is the one that is often trotted out to Europe and stuck in front of the Europeans, because Vance is the scary one for them. Anybody else would be too chummy with them. And if you really want to get the Europeans to pay, you need to bluff appropriately. And therefore, you need Vance in there to say the things that only Vance will say.
Sean, the one thing I want to say in response to this question, I think, that has not been touched on is, if we zoom out a little bit further than regime politics and get even a little bit more meta, of course,
capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. And so then, and it's too cheap of a response to just turn around and say, well, capitalism, they're all capitalists. I want to say it is the assumption of a job-centric society being the goal in a lot of ways, right? Like, where success is jobs. As long as people are gainfully employed and not thinking about genuine callings and real learning being obstructed by the job centrism, right? People tend to collapse real learning and occupations to the job centrism. But of course, real occupations are those callings that people have primordially always felt called to do, regardless of the profit motive, regardless of financial need. It's always come down to, no, I just feel called to work to serve people's health, right? Like, feeling called to serve people's health is a genuine primordial occupation that people would do if all of their needs were paid for or taken care of. People would still want to do that thing. And they would do it of their own free will with their time energy because they feel called to do it for humanity. And there's all kinds of things that we do that are like that. And those things are ruined when they're turned into jobs. But of course, these are not distinctions that our leaders would ever advance or recognize, because it's not in their interests to see that.
This is true. Most of those standard Federal Reserve benchmark goals are, of course, shared goals by any U.S. president. Full employment, 2% inflation. These are goals any U.S. president has, and they do heavily constrain the kinds of things that they can support or want. Now, occasionally you'll hear somebody talk about a transition period. Trump talked about that in relation to the tariffs. This is an admission that there might be some violation of these goals in the near term for some larger long-term objective. And that's potentially a little outside the box. But typically speaking, even
that?
if...
Could you explain? What does that mean?
So what that means is that there's some willingness to depart from full employment or 2% inflation, the standard Federal Reserve goals for what looks like a good economy. There's some willingness to depart from these kinds of goals for some period of time to achieve some larger purpose. So perhaps inflation might be a little elevated for a time, while these tariffs put a certain level of pressure on particular states and cause supply chains to shift. But this is an adjustment period because it will only cause this to happen for a period of time. You might have shortages of things for a year and a half. You might have a slightly elevated inflation rate for a year and a half. But the thought is, if you can get through that transition period, you might then have a situation that would be more conducive to growth in the long run, or might create more jobs in the medium to long term, and that could eventually be worth it politically. One of the difficulties about democracy is that the time schedule of democracy doesn't necessarily fit this kind of thinking. Transition periods, if they appear to have been chosen by the president as opposed to imposed upon him by events, tend to tick people off. And there's often a midterm election, a congressional election, in too close a proximity for this kind of strategy to be politically effective. So when you hear someone start talking about transition period in politics, this means they're considering, or at the very least, they want to be seen to consider for the purposes of credibly negotiating, something that they know to be politically dangerous to them.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's good to know. And then I'll just say, like, the reason I care about the job centrism thing, right? I mean, I think everybody here gets it, but it's always worth saying for the new passerby, the structural stultification, which is almost like saying retardation, but it's done. It's not just slowing down, but it's the structure, not just slowing down, but it's literally dumbing us down by having us do repetitious things that don't really serve our interests or lives or the betterment of society.
Stultification means that you're not able to grow beyond a certain point. Not
Right.
just that you're slowed down or that things become harder for you. It's like raising a baby in a metal cage.
Yeah.
And the baby, as it grows, it runs into the cage, and so it's not able to grow properly.
Yeah.
And it never becomes a full human body in a functional kind of way. It grows and it might stay alive, but it is mangled by the fact that it's growing inside a cage. Its body becomes incredibly debilitated and messed up, and horrible pain occurs, terrible suffering occurs. But if everybody is in one of these cages, it seems like a normal human life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a perfect metaphor or image that you're using here. The cage then is obviously wage labor or the job-centric society, right? And what it's stopping us from moving into is our actual interests, our passions, our callings, our potential, our talent, discovering our talent and cultivating it under tutelage, under mentors, right?
Yeah, and not only do they prevent you from doing this, there's a moment, I think, when people are kids or when they're students in the university system or in high school, where they know that there is something that they care about, that they want to do, that they love to do, that they would do if they could do it. But then once you are stuck in a job for long enough, there's a need to erase this on some level and pretend that that was never the case and that you never had that. And that was just being an immature person who had stupid dreams and never learns. So all of that stuff gets treated as, of course, that was silly young person stuff, not stuff I would have done or would have taken up if not for the need to get a job.
So imagine these deformed creatures that climb out of these metal boxes at the point that they're done growing. And now they're shaped like the insides of those boxes. There's actually a perfect image for this that I want to it's Minions, guys. It's Minions from Despicable Me. That is actually how Amazon sees its employees. They actually use a little minion-looking knockoff symbol character thing. I actually show the image of those characters in Time Energy in the book because I was a good worker at least during one phase of my Amazon employment. And I had all of these little award pins they give you. And each pin looks like a little minion. And it's just like, it's disgusting. But like, that is the way that people want, or at least kind of do see workers, is like, oh, they're the little things that make those little noises, but preferably seen and not heard, and if heard, just goofy. We don't have to take them seriously. They work in the background. And the point I want to say is they come climbing out of their little metal boxes. Now they've reached maturation. They're not going to keep growing past a certain point. And then they make primary identifications with their stultified result, right? So this is who I am. This is who I am. And it's like, yeah, it's really sad. That's who you are.
Yeah. And then right before you hit the metal sides of the box, right as you're growing and you can see those metal sides coming and you go, I don't know if I want to grow this way. I don't know if I want to hit the metal sides of the box. Is this really what's best for me? They go, you stupid kid. What do you know? Why do you think you're better than everybody else? Grow into the box like everybody else does.
And if you don't, we'll give you drugs for the rest of your life that you'll have to pay for. Or and if it's not ADHD medications, then maybe we'll just keep sending you to the delinquents place. Well, I don't know, wherever they go. Eventually juvie, right? You get branded as the the example, the scapegoat. Don't be like this person. You're being ranked and hazed against your peers. And that's not education. It's not real learning.
You take the box for the soul, or you get the box for the body. That's how it works.
Yeah. And so all of this is, whenever Nance and I are, we're talking about virtual purposiveness, the human as virtual purposiveness. This is what we're trying to get at, is that there is a self, its possibilities are virtually like almost within reach, right? But the metal box is there, right? And it keeps me up at night, and it gets me waking up early in the morning and getting after it most of the time. It's not just the slavery in the Congo or whatever. It's the actual 8 billion person genocide of voice that's been happening because of this, right? It's
it's every year a bunch
billion.
of kids hit that box, slam into the wall of that box, and they cry and cry. And that's what teen culture is. That's what college undergrad culture is. It's the cry as you slam into the wall of the box and feel it begin to ruin your body.
And then people say, wow, the music's getting so stupid and reactionary. Yes, that's the sound of human spirit smashing that wall. Can we break through? Well, that's the question. Speaking of which, so in close, I do want to plug something cool that's happening. So if you've all been following the channel recently, then Benjamin and I, we were just together in Virginia with Daniel Garner of OG Rose, as well as the rest of the TU Tour crew and Daniel's wonderful wife, Michelle, as well as their family, their precious, precious family. And we're about to get together again in the flesh. And so we'll be seeing a couple of you. Shout out to Jasper and Rebecca, who will be there, as well as Ian Wenzel and potentially Darren as well. I think he's going to be my chauffeur. But we will be in Chicago, I think, in a week. Is that when it's going to be? It's coming up really soon, huh?
Yeah, it's going to be April 5th.
April 5th.
Yeah,
So,
Dave is coming out for the Platypus International Conference. He's going to be on one of the panels in Chicago. And I am, of course, going to come and cheer Dave on. I'm really excited to see Dave do a platypus panel. I think he's going to be fabulous. He's going to bring incredible energy and exuberance. It's going to be awesome.
it's actually wild. It's wild. And it's not just me. It's your other podcast co-host, Doug.
Yes, Doug Lane will also be there. It'll be like two conversations that I have that will suddenly slam into each other with great force.
Yeah, that's right. I'm gonna body slam Doug. No. I've already been on a panel with Doug. It was a great time. That was in Portland during the 2023 Tour Zero. We did an event with Doug there. It was a small one, definitely a much smaller audience, and maybe only like 5 people, as opposed to, I think here at the Platypus Convention, we're gonna have a big room, lots of people. They're flying in from all over the world. Very, very fine people, I think. Probably lots of Marxists, anarchists, socialists, post-leftists of various stripes, lots of burnouts, lots of people who think the left is dead, but they want to say long live the left for various reasons. And there's Doug. He's going to be the sort of representative of this sort of old left position that I have been on the record critical of. And of course, this whole podcast, the premise of it is that I'm critical of it, but Benjamin and I, we still have great conversations. And so,
Yeah, I don't think the people are going to slam into each other with great force, but the discussions on some level necessarily will, because when you're not in a conversation for a while, and then all of a sudden you're thrown into a conversation with someone you've not been directly in conversation with, there's always a little bit of a getting the terms and the language right. And this does produce, even if people like each other and are well-intentioned, a little bit of that two triremes smashing right into each other, and who knows who's going to live.
Who knows?
Situations.
Who knows? But okay, so if Doug's going to be the old left guy, now I don't know much about Alex Higgins or what's going on with him, because I tried to look him up online and wasn't able to find much information. But the other name, if Doug's the old left guy, then the other name is about as close to like the perfect stand-in or representative that I could possibly find of the new left. And that is Bill Ayers. And so Benjamin and I were like, oh my gosh, we were just having this conversation a couple days ago. Bill Ayers is on this panel.
This is the Weather Underground guy that the Republicans talked about Barack Obama having had dealings with and tried to use to sink Barack Obama back in 08.
Yeah. And so Bill, the Weather Underground guy, the Weathermen, for those who don't know, they were kind of the result of the Days of Rage at the sort of burnout point for the 1960s radicals. If you read Todd Gitlin's The 60s, Years of Hope, Days of Rage. Well, the Days of Rage period of that book is where you'll find out all about the Weather Underground. I mean, they didn't just build bombs and set them off around the country. They actually bombed places like the Pentagon and the U.S. State Department, among a bunch of others. Nobody ever died except for their own people. I think I think there was an accident when they were constructing one of the bombs, which, by the way, if you've seen that little jukebox musical, the Beatles jukebox musical called Across the Universe, the whole storyline and character arc with the girlfriend, I don't know the names of the characters, but the girlfriend of the artist, when she gets into radicalism, at the point that she's burning out on the radicalism, after she's already broken up with her boyfriend because he wasn't radical enough, she starts burning out on the radicalism because these guys are all turning pessimistic and they start building bombs. So then she leaves them and she's not working with them anymore. And then I think towards the end of the movie, she actually sees in the newspaper that some of them got blown up. And so it is supposed to be like a throwback to the Weather Underground. So it's interesting.
Yeah, one of the things I think people forget about is that back in the 20th century, there were a lot of cases where people would make bombs or they would hijack planes, but not really with any intention of killing anybody. And so in the 20th century, there were a lot of jokes about bombs or jokes about hijackings, because before 9/11, a lot of the time, the assumption was that this stuff would be non-lethal. It was just inconvenient, or it was somebody trying to get attention for a cause. And after 9/11, the attitude and the way in which all this stuff was discussed really shifted. There were a few other events in the 90s that contributed to this shift, bombings that did kill significant numbers of people, like the Oklahoma City bombing, or the Unabomber. Some of these people who actually did seek out to kill people, as opposed to just call in a bomb threat and then make everybody evacuate the building and then make your explosion and force people to fix whatever physical damage you caused. There was a kind of way of protesting with bombs that was very tame, but also involved bombs. And this is if you aren't familiar with this period and with this kind of activism, it can be difficult to get your head around, because it was a kind of violent, nonviolent protest. And many of these people, if they did kill anybody, would have been horrified on some level that they actually killed anybody. And yet they want to use a bomb to make their point. So this is strange. It's a strange kind of protesting. And to try to even enter your head into the space of why would you make a bomb if you don't want to kill anybody? And many of the people who were involved in this stuff never went to prison for any of it. Because it used to be that you could do this kind of stuff and not ultimately go to prison.
Yeah, which is
it was a very different kind of world.
For conservatives, that's the big point, is like the FBI had called them domestic terrorists, the Weather Underground. None of them face any consequences. Bill Ayers goes on to write a bunch of books, friends with Obama, distinguished professor. Now he's retired, so I think it's emeritus. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Yeah. In his case, they tried to prosecute him, but they made mistakes legally in the way they went about prosecuting him. And so they were blocked ultimately from being able to go after him by the legal system. So this is not because he wasn't necessarily someone who should have been convicted. It was because they made mistakes, and then the legal system held them responsible for the mistakes which they had made. If you go back and look at the prosecution of the mob, there were many similar cases where government officials trying to go after different mobsters would make mistakes in the way that they legally pursued them and then not be able to make further progress. Right. Many, many cases where it seemed like there was a preponderance of evidence that somebody was involved in a criminal organization, and yet they lacked the relevant evidence presented in the right kind of way to get the mobster.
Right.
And so the FBI for a long time, acted like it was the underdog in these fights
Right.
because it was trying to come up with actual evidence that the courts would accept that would allow these people to be locked up. And it was really a significant challenge for the FBI to get that done. And so the FBI has this whole narrative of how it overcame all of these obstacles and impediments, and its eminent self-understanding.
This is actually, I think, yeah, you see this in these old mob movies and shows, but also in the liberal favorite of all time, right? The Wire in the first season. This is like, I mean, of course, it humanizes the gangs, and it also humanizes the cops. It humanizes everybody, but like the navigation of the legal red tape and and all of like the things they have to do to hold themselves back so that they are tapping these wires and getting this evidence through the proper channels is a big part of the point of that first season. And that relates in a funny way because this is like a liberal sort of sociologically informed intellectual sort of show that is a Democrat favorite. Well, that theme of being held back is one that is like the fundamental cornerstone of basically all the cop shows that my parents watch. You know, the Punisher would be the most extreme version of it, of course, but basically the guy who can't do the vigilante, he can't do justice, and so he has to go vigilante, you know?
Yeah. And you're supposed to identify with the renegade cop who's trying to do stuff but is being blocked by red tape, because if you identify with him, then you might support getting rid of the red tape, which is holding him back. And of course, eventually they did the Patriot Act and things changed significantly, but we still act as if they're more restrained than they in fact at this point legally are. And they act like they're restrained more than at this point they in fact legally are. And so we're able to get by most of the time, except in these cases where they do something which reveals how not legally restrained they actually in fact are, like kick out someone with a green card over something that person said. And then you discover actually legally they can do that. They can kick out somebody who has a green card on the basis of some foreign policy concern. And they can more or less, they don't have to establish to a judge that it's a valid foreign policy concern because judges have really no position to be making foreign policy per the law. So it's entirely legal to throw such a person out. And yet we go, wait a minute, we thought that people with green cards had rights more or less equivalent to those of U.S. citizens. It turns out that we've changed the law in such ways that they don't. The counterterrorism laws that were brought in after 9/11 greatly, greatly increased what these guys could do. And everybody forgets that Barack Obama killed an American citizen with a drone strike. I think it was 2011.
I think I memory hold it, but I do.
Deliberately, not collateral damage, targeted him, deliberately killed him.
I'm going to run upstairs and grab something, and I'll be right back. But I want you to, if you can, actually remind us all a little bit about that. And then I also, well, I'll be back before you're done with that. So I'll be right back. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was a while back. If you go all the way back to 2011, I'll even bring it up for you. Yes, Obama killed, what was his name? It was there was Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, who was killed. And he was only 16, I think it was. He was very, very young. Very young indeed. And the Obama administration got him. And the attitude was, well, if people are joining these organizations, then the fact that they're joining these organizations suggests in some way that they aren't really loyal U.S. citizens anyway, or they don't really value their citizenship. And there was a whole debate at this time in the political theory literature about what's called denationalization. And then Anwar al-Awlaki as well. So Anwar al-Awlaki, this is the one I was thinking of because, Abdul Rahman was just a kid. He was just 16. killed by a drone strike. But Anwar al-Awlaki was 40 years old and was an American Yemeni lecturer who was killed in Yemen. Speaking of Yemen, he was targeted and killed. So in his case, this was not a citizen who was killed by accident or killed because somebody made a collateral damage calculation. This is someone who was purposefully targeted. Barack Obama knew very well that he was a U.S. citizen and nonetheless killed him with a drone strike. And this kicked up a whole debate in the academy about, whether if you're going to do this with someone, shouldn't you have to take their citizenship away first? So there was an argument in the academy about whether you could denationalize people on the basis of their association or affiliation with terrorist groups. And there are some countries, not the United States, but the UK and Australia, I think, that did in fact do this. They took citizenship away from people so that they would not have to subject them to the various protections and rights that are involved with possessing citizenship. So some states like the UK and Australia said, okay, the answer is that you denationalize people, you take their citizenship away if they join terrorist groups. And then once you've done this, you can target them as non-citizens. In the American case, the Obama administration just killed a citizen and didn't care about the fact that he was a citizen and just violated completely his rights and set a grim precedent by doing that. In the other countries, there was a real debate about it, and I, mildly participated in the argument at the time. I said that if you think that you can denationalize citizens, then on some level you are failing to take responsibility for the way in which you brought up your own people. If you're going to assert, in the way that the UK does, this parliamentary sovereignty and this right to completely structure so many different aspects of human life, for your citizens, then you ought to also take some responsibility for the way that they turn out and not throw them out of your citizen body on the basis of how they behave.
Right.
States which, post 30s, post World War II states that have this very, very ambitious notion of how much they can be involved in the economy and in society and in the culture. These states have no business acting like the people who are their citizens are not in some way, at least in large part, their products.
Right.
And so to then take the citizenship away, I thought that was just an incredibly wretched thing to do. But a lot of other people think of citizenship as a transactional thing where you receive rights in exchange for the performance of duties. And therefore, if you don't perform the duties, then you can potentially lose the rights. And they think about this generally in terms of you can go to prison if you commit crimes. Right. So you can lose your rights if you fail to follow the law, if you fail to follow the duties. And then they take this argument simply to the level of certain kinds of crimes are potentially so great in character that they completely would cancel the citizenship rights of a person. But then once you make that kind of claim, where does that stop? And on what basis do you not simply take the citizenship rights away from anybody who commits any kind of violent crime or what you would consider to be a major or important offense? For me, the way of trying to resolve this was to deny transactional citizenship and to acknowledge the state is playing a role in constructing people, and therefore it is to some degree responsible for the way they turn out.
Well, and I'd also just add that if you can revoke someone's citizenship without a public legal proceeding where you have the right to defense and all of the things, due process. If your citizenship can be revoked without due process, and then you're drone striked before you even know that it was revoked, that means that all of us are living under a specter of a precedent established by that, right? Like we could all get, technically it could happen to any of us is really what that should mean. But because he has a Middle Eastern sounding name, I think it's easier for people to go, oh yeah, well, no, but the precedent,
in his case,
guys,
he didn't even lose them in a court. He didn't even lose them in court. In Britain and in Australia, there was a legal proceeding where the citizenship rights were lost through a formal legal proceeding. In the case of this guy in 2011, he was just killed. Yeah, there was no formal recognition at all, not even any legal proceeding.
Right.
Nothing.
So you have people saying, saying that Obama is sorry, that Trump's the fascist, and that, Obama was the good old days. But the Obama administration did set a precedent that makes it so, they can do that. They can do that now. They've done it, and they can do it again. And if Trump ever wants to do it, he can always say that, well, Obama did it. And so my approach is just to say, I love Trump. I would never say anything against the regime. I'll just go along with it 100% because I don't want to get drone striked. So keep that in mind, everybody. When you challenge the state, they can always just drone strike you.
Yeah, but don't let it intimidate you too much. They still had to plausibly be able to say to the public that this person was a member of a terrorist group.
Yeah.
Part of the explanation, the legitimation of it that allows them to get away with it is, well, this person is doing something you would never engage in. They're engaged in terrorist activity. This is somebody who, was in Yemen. You wouldn't go to Yemen, would you? And this was the whole argument back during the Obama years. Well, this guy, he wasn't acting like an American citizen. He was somewhere he didn't belong, doing things he shouldn't have been doing. So they'll make those kinds of arguments. So don't feel like simply by criticizing Trump. Some people have become so scared lately. They think if they say something bad
That's
about
true.
Trump that they're going to be thrown out of the country or they're
Right.
going to be killed or something. That isn't true. In the case of the guy who's being deported, it wasn't that he criticized Trump. It was that he is being framed as having said things in support of a terrorist organization. So an organization that's on the list of terrorist organizations, that being Hamas. So insofar as this could apply to you, it would have to be because you have done something to support an organization that is considered to be a terrorist organization, or you have engaged in activity which is considered to be terrorist activity. Now, that those terms are understood wider than you might think. Luigi Mangione is being pursued as a terrorist because his killing was politically motivated. But if you're not killing somebody and you're not expressing support for an organization that's on the official list of terrorist organizations, their capacity to simply kick you out of the country is much more, or to kill you, is much more limited. Not, for political reasons. Politically, it would be quite hard to explain doing that to you in such a way that large sections of the American public would accept. It would become a major, major issue if Dave were kicked out of the country or drone struck because he said something bad about the president. Nonetheless, part of how they try to use these sort of events to generate fear and upset in people is to elide all of the differences among the cases and act like because it happened to this person, it could happen to you if you say anything at all negative about anybody here. Earlier in our conversation, you made a crack about Hegseth's name. You used a different name for Hegseth. Does that mean that you're now going to get killed by a drone strike? You're going to be thrown? No, of course it doesn't mean those things.
Yeah.
Because in no way, shape, or form could they construe that criticism as support for terrorist activity.
Yeah.
They have to be able to pull off that move.
Yeah.
That right now, that barrier in terms of what people will accept as terrorist activity or support for a terrorist organization, that's the barrier in terms of how widely they can apply this. It's political. It's potentially mobile. It's not necessarily stuck in place, but that is ultimately the backstop for it. It's how widely can they persuade people? Can they persuade courts, judges? Can they persuade the American public at the end of the day that this activity is terrorist activity or this organization is a terrorist organization?
Mm-hmm.
And it was that period of unity everybody waxes on about. Oh, wasn't it so great how unified we were after 9/11, and we voted so overwhelmingly the Congress voted to give them the rights to do these things and to put this kind of terrorism language into the law. So much so that even when it's pulled out of federal law, you'll often find this language in state laws. So even when they make reforms to federal law to tone it down a bit in places, which occasionally does happen, you'll often find state governments with stricter and nastier notions and wider applying notions of what a terrorist is than federal law itself has. And in those cases, it won't obviously be unconstitutional for, say, the state of New York to have a wider or more muscular notion of what a terrorist is than federal law itself does. And that's the issue with Mangione. Mangione might be difficult to prosecute as a terrorist under federal law, but it's New York law that potentially allows him to be classified as a terrorist.
And was he officially classified as a terrorist, or are they just trying to do that?
They're trying to prosecute him, and there will have to be a judgment, of course, involved about whether what he did constitutes terrorist activity.
Right. Okay.
But certainly they can hit him much harder on a terrorism charge than a regular murder charge.
Jeez. Yeah, he's going to go to Guantanamo now, and they'll torture him for 20 years. On this, I think I remember. Wasn't it Trump who said that anarchists are terrorists? But didn't he say that like in I don't know, 2018, 2019, 2020? I don't know. I feel like I remember it might have been when he sent the National Guard into Portland to stop some protests or something like that. And I think I remember Trump being on the record saying that if you're an anarchist, you're a terrorist, or that that anarchism is a terrorist movement or something like that.
Well, anarchism has historically been associated with bombings that have killed people and politically motivated assassinations and killings, particularly in the 19th century when the anarchists killed the President of the United States. So there is a case for anarchists in certain situations being terrorists, but it depends on the content of what the group is doing. There is an official list of organizations that are considered terrorist organizations. And if you are expressing support for an organization that is off that list, but it has some sort of loose anarchist affiliation, it would not at all be obvious that your support for such an organization would constitute support for a terrorist organization. It has to be on the official terrorist organizations list. Now, that suggestion suggests that if, say, your anarchist organization does become involved in bombings and politically motivated violent acts, that it could stand to be potentially classified on that list. And so certainly if you start doing politically motivated killing in an organized way, if a group of people start doing Luigi Angie Mangione type activity together in some sort of organized way, yes, they'll end up getting on the terrorism list. They'll put that organization on the list. If they do politically motivated violent killing, it'll happen. They'll end up on that list. And they can put any organization on that list that they want, really, within the relatively loose confines of what a terrorist organization is. But people won't accept it if it's too weird. If you put the Chicago Bulls on the terrorist organization list, people won't accept that because they go, come on, like Chicago Bulls are a basketball team. What are you doing? This is ridiculous. So there's still this limit to what can you plausibly persuade people constitutes a terrorist organization.
Right. Well, and it's definitely not going to be Theory Underground ever, because Theory Underground is working for the CIA. We definitely want to stop Marxism. And so it's not I'm joking, of course, but we're not revolutionary and we're not for insurgency. So with that said, I wanted to point out, though, Antifa versus right-wing militia is sort of, in duopolistic terms, the boogeymen of the opposite sides, right? So, progressives and Democrats, it's the right-wing militias that are scary. For the right, it's the Antifa and BLM that's scary. And so both sides are constantly trumping up this fear towards this sort of scapegoated stereotype, which is from time to time cashed out in reality by, you actually have acts of terror being carried out by either group. And so, I mean, whether it's Proud Boys or the Mountaineer Militia in 1996, when some of these guys tried to bomb a place, I'm just looking at the Southern Poverty Law Center's page here on the militia movements in the United States, and it's got its top.
Yeah, militias are tricky because according to the Second Amendment, you are allowed to start militias. You can have a club of people who engage in military training together. Mm-hmm. That is legally permitted. What you can't do is then commit politically motivated violent criminal acts. If you do that, then you're likely to be classified as a terrorist organization. And of course, these groups that seem very much on that line will say, we are militias, We are not terrorist organizations, specifically because the law permits you to form a militia.
And so January 6th insurrection is on their list of things here. What I want to highlight, though, is that I've heard a lot of Democrats talk about Kyle Rittenhouse as a terrorist, or that they've talked about the January 6th insurrection guys as terrorists. And so what we have is both sides pointing the finger to the other side and trying to expand the notion of what counts as terrorism based off of a stereotype, like a very simplistic sort of stereotype.
Yeah, this has been going on since 9/11. Every time you start using that word terrorist in a cheap and flippant way, you are helping other people in the future to potentially classify stuff that you might do as terrorist. The widening of the concept of terrorism is a very unwieldy kind of thing. And a lot of people think that if their guys are in charge, they identify with the administration or with the party that's in power. They think if their guys are in charge, they can widen the concept of terrorism and not pay any kind of price for this. But if you keep widening the concept of terrorism, there is always a question of could it get wide enough to include things that we very, very obviously do not think it should include. And when you start talking about people who are killing in their minds, they think for self-defense reasons, or if you start talking about people who didn't commit violent acts and you start using the word terrorist to apply to stuff that doesn't have a political motivation, isn't a violent act, or is an act of a state actors. You know, one of the things that's very confused lately is people alleging that states commit terrorist acts, state terrorism. State-sponsored terrorism might be a different matter. A state giving weapons to a particular group that is not a state group, but is receiving some level of state resource without state coordination, without the state directing the activities of that group. You know, that could be a terrorist group. If, say, the Iranians give weapons to the Houthis, but then don't tell the Houthis what to do with those weapons, and then the Houthis attack for political reasons ships in the Red Sea, you could see how the Houthis would be framed as a terrorist group.
Right. Right.
But if you say that the Houthis are straightforwardly a part of the regular Iranian army, then you would say that when the Houthis attack these ships, that the Iranian state has attacked the ships, and then this would be a reason for an act of war with the Iranian state. So the way in which the classification happens is quite consequential in terms of how we interpret the act. So they're framed as a proxy with some level of possible influence, but not total hand-in-glove direction from the Iranian state. And this allows them to be tied to Iran, but not tied to Iran. They're related to Iran when it's convenient, but not related to Iran when it's inconvenient. And there's some playing with how tight that relationship is framed as being. Similar kind of thing occurs with any other group that you use that kind of language in reference to. You're creating a situation where there's ambiguity that could result in serious mistreatment of people in violation of their rights.
So I want to hit on two things here. One is paranoia, and the other is something people could rightfully be paranoid about. But I just want to remind everybody, Theory Underground listeners, the true heads are not paranoid. We're courageous and not freaking out about every bad possibility or whatever. Look, when I'm saying that we could get technically, if Obama got to do that, then Trump could do that. Like the fact is, we lost several people over the last 3 months who sent me almost like resignation letters or texts, basically being like, they don't think that Benjamin or I are that we're seriously that they were serious enough about the MAGA movement, that we're not serious enough about how bad everything is. And in 2 cases, the people said that they're genuinely afraid for their lives because they've said negative things publicly about Trump. And, everybody, yeah, you do you. I didn't realize we had paranoid people like that in our ranks, really. I just didn't even, but now they're gone, thankfully. I mean, hopefully, because that's no way to live, folks. And in both of their cases, they just watch way too much TV, right? They just watch way, 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 way too much TV.
Yeah, there's also people thinking that they matter to the state much more than they in fact do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The reason that this guy at Columbia, that the things he said about Hamas became the basis for this action is that he was leading and organizing activity at Columbia that upset people in positions of power and influence. Because Columbia is one of these elite schools,
Right.
and the stuff that goes on at Columbia is of notice to the alumni of Columbia, many of whom are in significant positions. And it's certainly of interest to the people who donate to various kinds of research efforts at Columbia. And these donors and alumni have a lot of influence, particularly at an Ivy League school like that. So there's a whole bunch of specific things that went into this. Now, that doesn't mean that it won't happen to more people. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be concerned about it happening to additional people. But that doesn't mean it can literally happen to anyone at any time for any reason either.
Right.
And it certainly doesn't mean that you at home with your Twitter account are saying things that these people care about.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of megalomania that fuels that. It's not just paranoia, it's also pride and hubris to an inordinate degree. You put fear and pride together, you get really, really messed up stuff.
So it's kind of like a delusion of grandeur thing too. Which
it takes both of those things, really.
So the part though to be, I say paranoid about, but I don't like the term paranoid in this sense. I think that by taking concerning issues seriously as possibilities, we might change our behavior, or society at large might kind of be on guard against certain things. And so, of course, sci-fi has done a lot of good in terms of getting us to be aware of and hopefully on guard against some of the things that these Silicon Tech Valley elite types are doing, right? Making super soldiers, for instance, right? My point is just to bring it back to capital versus time energy and Nick Land's thesis that capital is AI. It is a form of distributed intelligence. It always has been. It's out of Pandora's box, and it is doing what it's doing, assembling itself in the future out of its enemies' resources here in our present. Every day, it's assembling itself to replace us, if not to replace us literally, to replace a lot of people's functions. And what is Doge doing right now? What is Musk doing right now? Doing like this clearing of all of these different departments, trying to fire everybody, and in a lot of cases try to replace them with AI. And so, yeah, having humans replaced by AI is I think what Hannah Arendt is really getting at in a sort of sense. Maybe she wasn't thinking this far ahead, but with the banality of evil thesis or administrative evil, people become like robots that just receive commands and then do evil in a sort of way where it's just part of normal life. It's all just normalized, right? Well, also people get flattened down, and it's Marcuse's thesis, one-dimensional man. We become so stultified that we actually are replaceable by AI in some cases. A not insignificant percentage of students are not going to be able to write those essays at the level that ChatGPT is. Now, they're not able to realize, because they don't have the reading comprehension or experience, that that's still garbage, but that's because they're at this lower half. Well, guess what? They're replaceable. They're replaceable by AI. But also, what happens when you replace key professional positions, like really important positions, with AI? You have problems with like drone strikes on people who are innocent, which is already happening when human beings are behind the machines. But two examples that I wanted to touch on, the Trinix thing that I talked about with Nance on Why Us, right? Where we're getting copyright struck because we played the original short of a little boy in Jamaica singing a song. And then we get copyright struck, not because that song of him singing was copyrighted by him, but because a couple of boys in the US remixed that song, and then the algorithm or the bots, the copyright bots, just assumed that the Trinix boys who did the remix, they have ownership over the original. So now we're getting copyright struck by the guys who did the remix when we didn't even play the remix. We played the original. That's a robot error. That's an AI error. And in the same way, my friend Bert, he in Boise, he goes to the botanical gardens every Sunday, and he'll upload pictures every once in a while, publicly, of some of the beautiful things at the Boise Botanical Gardens. And one of the things was like this Native American sort of sculpture with like plants growing on it and stuff like that. It's just like this beautiful thing. Well, the Facebook bots sent him a warning that if he did cultural appropriation again, his account would get nuked because it's culturally insensitive. Of course, all he was doing was sharing an image of this beautiful art from the botanical garden. But the Facebook bots, in their attempt to be woke, in the same way of the YouTube bots trying to protect copyright, are so far off from anything that any human being would actually even think. That's my major concern, is that in 5 to 10 to 15 years, these kinds of efforts like Doge to replace humans with machines are going to make it easier and easier for drone strikes of civilians to be accidental or plausibly accidental. Yeah.
This is something that my old supervisor at Cambridge, David Runciman, wrote a book about back in 2023, the handover, how he gave control of our lives to corporations, states, and AIs, in which he makes the case that corporations and the state are artificial agents, that they are already forms of AI.
Oh, really?
Because they make decisions through impersonal mechanisms that nobody can own individually. So they already are, in effect, AI decisions, and that modernity is this history of an artificial intelligence, which through representation we are persuaded is us.
Okay, and that's by who? What's his name again?
David Runciman.
All right, well, I'll definitely check that out. And I know Mikey would love to talk to him and or you about his work, because that's fascinating and goes really, really good with the whole Landian thesis.
Yeah, as I've been paying a little bit more attention to what exactly is going on with Mikey and the raising of Nick Land and some of this talk about AI, I'm going, wait a minute. David talked about some of this stuff.
Wow. Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
Well, and okay, how do we get into the whole domestic terrorism and bombs and all that stuff? Well, it's because I'll be on that panel with Bill Ayers, and he's controversial to people like my dad because he never faced any consequences for blowing places up. And in 2001, he said he has no regret for setting off the bombs. I would love to come back with you, Benjamin, later this week, next week, or the week after to talk about something by him, maybe the Weather Underground Manifesto versus a little thing that he wrote last year. I'd like to kind of compare and contrast where he was, where he is, and kind of do that because we get to talk to him. We get to hang out with him next week.
Yeah, we can definitely take a look at all of that and have some fun, for sure.
Yeah, maybe we could. Hey, everybody, maybe we could get him onto Why Left.
We'll see if you get along with him well enough on that panel.
Oh, he's gonna love us. Love me. He'll love me just fine. I'm not gonna be an asshole. My only goal is to say that I'm not sure that the old or new left has properly or really adequately faced three major developments in what I have called the PCFM, the post-class fractured mass, and so, or what we here call the PCFM at Theory Underground. And so, yeah, this will be the most definitive, succinct treatment that I am able to give to the concept of the PCFM with my own little, personal flourish on it. I'll tie in time energy, structural stultification, whatever. And the thing is I'm going to do that in a way that I hope builds up some similarity between everyone before I kind of highlight difference, because I think we all share values. I think that even Ayers, who's someone who, when I read some of his stuff, I'm just like, wow, he has this really starry-eyed view of all of the radicalism in America. He's just this fusionist with starry eyes, Even though I feel that way about, a leftist elder or whatever, I think that he also feels strongly about what I was talking about earlier with the metal boxes, as Benjamin was saying, the structural stultification of people. Now, maybe he doesn't think of it in terms of time energy, of course, but guess what? Everybody who's tried to change the world for the better is aware that people are messed up and hurting themselves and others, and we want to do something about it. And that's ultimately what activists are trying to do. There are these crises of academia, the attention economy, and activism, the 3 A's, as we refer to them. There are these crises, and some people are not really facing up to or tarrying with those crises. And I think maybe Ayers is not, he's 80 years old, guys. You know, we can kind of give him a break. A lot of these developments happened in slow motion, and so he acclimated to them, and so it's just kind of nothing's really changed for him. Maybe not. Maybe we'll find out otherwise. But I think that the shared basis and concern for humankind and the future is something that will tie us all together. And so that is, you know, I'll be coming kind of from that place. So
Yeah, and there's some real value in having to write up something for a short little panel like that. It really compels you to put something together at a length that you might not otherwise choose. And that can force you to bring things together in a way that you wouldn't otherwise have done. It can be very generative and helpful.
Yeah, this one will be the last 3 years of Theory Underground kind of concentrated into 12 minutes. No pressure, right? No pressure. So, all right, everybody.
You could do it, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Benjamin. We're going to close this thing out. Any last
All right.
words?
Thank you guys so much for listening and being here and caring about this work. Appreciate you guys. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Peace. Okay, hold on. Sorry everybody. Let me try that again.
Revolution, but the only way to foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Theory Underground exists to cultivate the conditions necessary for a working class intellectual renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitarian niches. At TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis, spread out throughout the year of 2025. Those courses are 12 Core Concepts and the Fundamental Problems with the Situation Today with social theorist David McCarricker, 12 Essential Political Thinkers with political theorist Benjamin Studebaker, and The Philosophy of Nature with philosopher Nina Power.
The way these all get woven together at a deeper and more meta level is through the ongoing research seminars led by David McCarricker, Benjamin Studebaker, and Michael Downs, where they engage with one another's work by sharing developments from their own perspectives, theory, and research.
If you subscribe at higher levels and support our work, we'll support your development with bespoke teaching. Alone and unaided, we struggle to grasp our situation in its fullness and formulate a meaningful response. By working together and pooling our energies, we can do better. Join us at theoryunderground.com/subscribe.
There'll be 2 kinds of people in 10 years. Those who said, I knew all along Theory Underground was going to make this huge difference. Those are the people that are like Nance, who were on the sidelines at one point and then said, nah, I'm going to get in. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to go hard. And then there's another kind of person, a person who waits in the wings, collects receipts, and who will say in 10 years, oh yeah, I was there. I saw that happen. And then they'll gossip monger. Listen, if you want to get involved, get involved. But if you're going to sit there in the bleachers, well, here's some popcorn.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Theory Underground exists to cultivate the conditions necessary for a working class intellectual renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitarian niches. At TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis, spread out throughout the year of 2025. Those courses are 12 Core Concepts and the Fundamental Problems with the Situation Today with social theorist David McCarricker, 12 Essential Political Thinkers with political theorist Benjamin Studebaker, and The Philosophy of Nature with philosopher Nina Power.
The way these all get woven together at a deeper and more meta level is through the ongoing research seminars led by David McCarricker, Benjamin Studebaker, and Michael Downs, where they engage with one another's work by sharing developments from their own perspectives, theory, and research.
If you subscribe at higher levels and support our work, we'll support your development with bespoke teaching. Alone and unaided, we struggle to grasp our situation in its fullness and formulate a meaningful response. By working together and pooling our energies, we can do better. Join us at theoryunderground.com/subscribe.
There'll be 2 kinds of people in 10 years. Those who said, I knew all along Theory Underground was going to make this huge difference. Those are the people that are like Nance, who were on the sidelines at one point and then said, nah, I'm going to get in. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to go hard. And then there's another kind of person, a person who waits in the wings, collects receipts, and who will say in 10 years, oh yeah, I was there. I saw that happen. And then they'll gossip monger. Listen, if you want to get involved, get involved. But if you're going to sit there in the bleachers, well, here's some popcorn. I hope you have fun.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Theory Underground exists to cultivate the conditions necessary for a working class intellectual renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitarian niches. At TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis.